Hey guys, welcome to part 2 of the APC series. If you're new here, hi, my name is Ntwani Ngomani, and if you're a returning subscriber, thank you so much for tuning back in. This is definitely part 2 of the APC series where we go through the APC work that you need to do before you actually sit for the exam, right? Or for the info on the day. Anyway, if you have not watched the last video, which is part 1, it may be rather useful for you to start there because we discussed trigger identification in that video. I will leave a card up below for you guys to go watch it. In today's video, I want to firstly extend a little bit from last week's video with regards to trigger identification. I think the one thing or two things that I forgot to mention in there is one, there will always be information that is context in your pre-release information. Context information is basically info that you need to absorb. So for example, if they tell you that BK, which is the entity we've been using in part 1, is a listed entity, that is literally just context. It's for you to understand the magnitude of and the nature of the entity, right? It doesn't mean you now need to go into looking at the JSE listing requirements. They already told you that it is listed, so that means they have met their requirements, and that is really just context. Second thing is embedded knowledge. Embedded knowledge differs from triggers, guys. Embedded knowledge is stuff that you should already know. So when you're reading your pre-release information, there will be information in there that you naturally as an accounting person should already know. An example of this is line items in the financial statements. I've already spoken about this as well. Line items in the financial statements are not in themselves triggers, but they can be if there is further information to elaborate on that. But if they just tell you that this company has inventory sitting in their statement of financial position, that is literally embedded knowledge. All you need to do is understand and know how the inventory line gets into the F's. So that becomes embedded knowledge. The third thing that I may have forgotten to say in the first video is that we need to be aware, right, that you don't treat embedded knowledge as triggers. Guys, you only have 5 days to work on the pre-release information, and 5 days is not a lot of time. You may think it is, but it's actually not, right? So you need to be careful not to treat embedded knowledge as triggers that need work to be done. And this is where your group comes in, guys. If you're doing APC and you're on a board course, please do be part of a group. It'll help you to work with others, to have discussion on certain things that you are unsure about and that others may know. So it also helps in the trigger identification, where you think something is a trigger, but your group members may think, actually, no, this is embedded knowledge, or no, this is context, right? So have those discussions, have a group. It is very, very useful. So those are the 3 things that I forgot to mention in the last video. Now let's get on to performing the work or performing the research. Now I want to start on industry research, and this is the one thing I struggled a lot on, because they just tell you go and do industry research, but the thing is, where do I start? Like, what do I look for? For instance, in our final December APC pre-release, we had the avocado business, agriculture basically. So I had to go and do industry research on that. But what exactly do I look for when I'm doing industry research? The one thing that worked for me, that I think maybe you guys can try, obviously if it works for you, great. If it doesn't, you would have to find something that does, is that I didn't do industry research independently of my pre-release. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't go on Google and started searching agriculture industry something. I would always do industry research with reference to the information that is in the pre-release. For example, there was a trigger about threats in the UK on avocado farming and the environmental impact. So I went on to say, okay, I'm in the agriculture industry, in the avocado production business, what are some of the environmental concerns that the industry faces? What are some of the risks that the industry faces in this light, right? So I did my industry research in that manner, and not necessarily blank space, just went in and looked for each and every tiny little information that I could get on the industry. Now, what type of information or what sources of information can you look at when you're looking at or you looking to research your case study? The first thing you can look at is specific reports and articles. Obviously, the news always have reports. For example, when we had that mining in Dava, the reporters are there. They report on the discussions that are held in the mining indaba. So if you have a company that is in the mining space, those reports would then be great and be useful for you. The second thing is integrated reports of other companies. If you are doing research, definitely you would have to get a competitor to your case study. So a different entity that is in the same industry, get the integrated report of that entity and just read it to get an overview of what's happening, because integrated reports are prepared by very knowledgeable people, CEOs, CFOs, COOs. Sometimes those people will really have an in-depth understanding of what's happening in whatever industry you're in. The other thing is financial statements. Obviously, that is without doubt. Line items in the financial statements of a competitor can be similar to the line items in your case study. So you might find some explanations in there in the notes or whatever. Other things are public statements and press reports. Public statements, I'm a bit itchy about it, because not everything that is written in the press is actually true. Some people do speculate, which brings me to my last point on sources of information, is that you need to make sure that the sources of info that you're using are reliable. Guys, like, this is a real thing, okay? It's an exam, and you don't need to go there with someone else's opinions. You need to go there with facts, and you need to go there with reliable information. Okay, so let's talk about how you look at the external environment when you're looking to do your research, or you're looking to do your industry research specifically. So in the external environment, I normally would do a pestle analysis. A pestle analysis, just looking at the political, the environmental, social, technological, legal, all of those things that we learn. You can do like a quick reference on that. I think the one thing that helped me a lot is to look at the strategies of other companies or similar companies or competitors. What are the strategies that other companies are sort of moving towards, and where is your case study company in terms of that? Because it happens that sometimes we had a case study where we were looking at the renewable energy industry, and a lot of the companies in there were moving towards technology. They were embracing technology and how they can use technology to basically generate electricity, and this company was just moving in an opposite direction. They still wanted to do things in the traditional way. So definitely, like, their strategy was not in line with current events, what their competitors are doing, so it made them lose competitive edge, right? So strategy, when looking at the external environment, is one of those things that you definitely just need to consider. So definitely your pestle, your SWOT analysis, if you're really into those kind of things. For me, they didn't really work. I did do a pestle once or twice, but honestly, it didn't really work for me, because it just felt so out of place, and so like it wasn't matching what was happening for me. So I just started looking at strategies and the risks that the entities is exposed to, as well as its competitors. Coming into the internal environment, the internal environment is basically you analyzing the company or your case study. I've already stated that the financial statements are a big help. Your ratios, look at what's happening with their liquidity. Is there a problem? Their solvency, are they highly geared, in terms of their debt and all of that. So those are some of the things that you need to be aware of as well. And also other specific risks that they mention in the case study that maybe they are facing as an entity, because it's possible that they face risk internally that may not really apply to other entities in the industry, So yeah, you need to consider those things. Lastly is your COVID-19 considerations before our time of the APC. COVID-19 was non-existent, but now it is definitely a factor. Look at the going concern of the company. Obviously, guys, when you're doing this research, you need to look at it in context with every other information that you have. If there is no indication from your financial statement analysis that this company could have a going concern issue, or they have a cash flow issue or whatnot, then there is really no need for you to bring in COVID and say, actually, we think this company could close down because of COVID-19, because they're really operating well, they're thriving despite what's happening in the economy, you know. So you need to always bring information in with reference to what's already there. Okay, so that is COVID-19. If it does apply, it will definitely apply in most cases, obviously, because it has had an effect on the operations of most entities. So the last thing, or few last things to consider, is a multidisciplinary approach. So what do I mean by multidisciplinary approach? The thing is, this is a process for you to be professionally competent, right? This is not a process for you to be an auditor or a financial manager or a tax consultant or whatever. It is a process for you to be all in one, basically a well-rounded CA, right? So for you to be a well-rounded CA, there are 4 majors that you need to know and understand. There is tax, financial management, accounting, and audit, right? So you need to have a multidisciplinary approach to all your triggers. And what do I mean by that? Is that for every trigger you need to consider the tax implications, the accounting implications, how would you audit that, the financial management aspect of it. An example of this, we had the IS-41 trigger, the bearer plants. They wanted us to, you know, explain how we can account for the bearer plants in terms of IS-41. So out of that trigger, we needed to think of the accounting, which is IS-41. We needed to think of the auditing. If auditors were to come, how would they audit this? Would they need to go to the farm and actually count the number of bearer plants that are there? Financial management, we need to consider, how do we value our bearer plants? How do we place value on those things? How do we place value on the avocados that are still on the trees versus the avocados that we've already picked? In terms of tax, how do we account for bearer plants in terms of tax? You know, what is the tax base? Are there any benefits that we get from a tax perspective? Tax incentives, basically. So that's a multidisciplinary approach. You always need to think about this. Another thing that is a bit of a trick that I actually wasn't aware of when I was going through until right at the end is pay special attention to amounts that are stated when you're reading through your information, other than amounts in the financial statements, but like amounts that are just, you know, randomly there. Sometimes they like doing this thing where they put an amount and they say excluding VAT, or put an amount and say including VAT. Always think, when you see that excluding, including VAT, always think of what is the VAT implication, right? Because VAT is part of tax, so it's a multidisciplinary thing that you also need to consider. So yeah, those are the steps that I'd follow really when conducting my research. Obviously there is a more structured approach which I have written down, but I think it's very technical and it needs to be applied to a specific trigger for you to understand how it works. So I don't think going into that would actually be helpful, but I think what I have outlined and the way I have discussed it, I know it's going to be difficult obviously if you're doing it for the first few times, but if you keep on doing it, then you learn and you practice the skill of doing research, right? There's a lot of information out there on Google, on newspapers, if you still read newspapers. But guys, please be careful of the kind of information that you use. Your sources, let there be legit sources, guys. Every industry has some sort of governing body, so look at the press releases of those bodies, because they probably would be much more reliable than just an ENCA or, you know, like any other publication that we don't know if they affect or just people's opinions. So yeah, that is basically how you do research, where you can do research. Obviously, this is my own experience. You are allowed to go and find what works for you and what doesn't work for you. But yeah, if you have any more questions, please do drop them in the comments and I will get right on them. I will see you guys in my next video where we actually discuss information on the day and how to answer the requirements. Bye.